So I'm going to be walking through how to make the tree for the sentence, "I want this homework to be easy to complete." So the first thing I'm going to do is go through each word in the sentence and grab its lexical entry out of our lexicon and put it through whatever lexical rules we need to put it through in order to get it into a word structure that can go play in the syntax. On Canvas, there will also be a PDF of the final tree in LaTeX because this is going to be done by hand and it's not going to be very pretty to look at, but it will at least help you understand the process or a process you can use to get your trees complete. So first we have I, which is of type pronoun lexeme, and its argument structure has nothing in it. It goes through the constant lexeme lexical rule. And now that we are in type word, thanks to the ARP, it maps the argument structure onto spur and comps, but it's empty, so those just remain empty. For most of these words, the focus is going to be the argument structure because that determines the valence and how the pieces fit together and what grammar rules you can use to make the tree structure. And I'm going to put it here in a word bank and I will pull from this word bank as I'm building the tree. So next we have want, and we are kind of deciding whether it's an object raising verb or an object control verb, and I believe it's an object raising verb. It's more similar to expect, so you could say I expect it to rain, but not I persuade it to rain, but you can say I want it to rain. So for that reason, I'm going to say this is an object raising verb. And that type tells us that there are three things on the argument structure. The first thing is a noun phrase. The second thing is identified with the specifier of the third thing. And then given the sentence we're working with, we're going to want to go through the non-third person singular lexical rule. And the ARP will map these things on the argument structure onto specifier and comps. And we've got our word structure for want, which can go in our word bank. Oh, also forgot to mention that we want the second complement of want to be inf plus, which I figured out by looking at the lexical entry for a different object raising verb, expect, and noticed that its third thing in the argument structure should be inf plus. And so I just applied that to this case because it also is true. Obviously, there are other details and features that are being established as we go through these lexical rules, but I'm kind of just focusing on the things that I think are important for building the tree. But if there are particular features that you're curious about that I have not covered in this video, you can post on Canvas or comment on the video and we will hopefully get back to you on those questions. So next is this pretty simple one, det lexeme, with an empty argument structure. Goes through the constant lexeme lexical rule, and we can put that word structure in our word bank. Then homework, count noun lexeme. According to this type, the first thing on the argument structure is count plus, which is a feature that only applies to determiners. And according to the type, there could be other things on the argument structure, such as if this were a noun that took complements, but we know for this sentence that's not the case, so I'm just not going to include that and say that we know there's one thing on the argument structure. Constant lexeme lexical rule, ARP, maps that onto the specifier, comps is empty, and now we can put it in our word bank. Next word is to, infinitival to, but we have two of them, so we only have to really do this one time. Our book already has a lexical entry for to, and it is of type oxv lexeme. It is inf plus, which we already know is important because we know that the verb want wants its third argument to be inf plus. And then the argument structure has two things on it. And in the lexical entry itself, it just says that the first thing is an x, but if you trace that back up, oxv lexeme inherits from subject raising verb lexeme, which states that the first thing on the argument structure is identified with the specifier of the second thing on the argument structure, which is important. I'm just putting random numbers in as the tags now, but these might change as we compose the tree. So on our argument structure, we have the first thing identified with the specifier of the second thing, and the second thing is inf minus form base. Also, I forgot to write down that to itself is also form base. So because of this, we go through the base form lexical rule. So now we have a word structure that is inf plus form base with a specifier that is identified with the specifier of the complement, and the complement is inf minus form base. And that is for infinitival to. We have two of those, so I'm going to put two of them in my word bank. Next we have be, and we also already have a lexical entry for this in the book. We have two lexical entries in our book for be, but this is the oxv lexeme one. And you can tell this because the object raising lexeme one requires that the first thing in the argument structure be a form there. And that is obviously not the situation we're dealing with in this sentence, so we are using the other one. Just like before, because this lexical entry is of type oxv lexeme, we are inheriting from subject raising verb lexeme, which means that the first thing on the argument structure is identified with the specifier of the second thing on the argument structure. This lexical entry does not state specifically that this verb is form base, but we kind of ultimately know that it has to be because it's going to become the complement of the infinitival to, which requires that its complement is form base. So we're going to run this through the base form lexical rule. And we also get the information from the word structure for to that it wants its complement to be inf minus as well. And now our word structure can go in the word bank. Next, we have easy, which we also have a lexical entry for. So it is an adjective lexeme, and in its arg structure, the first thing is a noun phrase, which is co-indexed with the gap of the second thing on the argument structure. And the gap is also identified with the stop gap of easy. The lexical entry actually stipulates that there can be more than one thing in the gap, but we just know that's not true in this sentence, so I didn't include that. And the second thing on the argument structure is inf plus, which is good. We know we already have the inf plus aux v2 that's going to fill that role. Because it's an adjective lexeme, it's going to go through the constant lexeme lexical rule. And now we have this word structure that can go in our word bank. Then the last word we have is complete. So in this case, complete is a strict transitive lexeme, as in like I complete this homework. Technically that means that there are two things on the argument structure that are both head nominal, but I'm just going to put X and Y right now, just for simplicity. And because we know that this is going to be the complement of infinitival to, we want it to be form based, so we're going to send it through the base form lexical rule. So at the very least, because strict transitive lexeme ultimately is inheriting some constraints from info lexeme, we know that the first thing on the argument structure definitely is on the specifier list. So in this case, we have one more thing on the argument structure. And because the ARP actually says that the argument structure is the sum of two lists, A and B, where A is the specifier list and B is whatever else is left minus the gap, there are essentially two ways that this can play out. So we can either put that other thing on the comps list and have nothing in the gap, or have nothing on the comps list and put it on the gap. In this sentence, we know we want the gappy version, so that's the one that we're going to put in our word bank. And also for every other word that we put in our word bank, the same thing would have applied. There would have been more than one way to correctly realize the ARP, but we were not using any of the gappy ones, so I just didn't address it, but here we do want the gappy one. So we have all of our word structures, and now we're ready to build the tree. As I was editing this footage and also making the LaTeX version of this tree, I realized I made a pretty fatal error in the video, and that is as I was using the rules to combine the pieces together, I was not tagging them. So for example, complete is the complement of to, and I put those pieces together correctly, but I then did not create a tag in the comps list for to that identified it with the node of complete. I have done that correctly in the LaTeX version of this tree, but it is not in the video. I'm just kind of piecing everything together without including the tags, so just note that really those tags need to be there. Also, as far as the LaTeX version goes, it is a very simplified version of the tree that really only includes tags between the nodes and doesn't include any of these other features that I discussed, such as inf plus or form base. So both of these resources really should be digested in tandem because they are both incomplete in some way. I personally build my trees essentially from right to left because it makes more sense to me to pick up the complements and then the specifiers, and since complements are always at the right, you start at the right. So I'm going to grab my first two words, to complete. I forgot to write it down a second ago actually, but we also know that complete is form based because we sent it through the base form lexical rule. So our word to requires a complement that is a form base, so we have that sorted out. And the specifier of its complement is the same as its own specifier. So we can actually match this tag with that. So we can use the head complement rule to get a VP, and we pass up the specifier from the head verb and also the gap from complete, which I just have as Y now, but now I'm going to put in a number tag for it. I'll just call it 1. So now we have our verb phrase for to complete, and it has one thing on a specifier list, which we ultimately are not really going to do anything with, and one thing on its gap list. So our next word is easy, which is an adjective. And on our word structure for easy, we see that the stopgap is identified with the gap of its complement. So actually, I need to correct these tags so that they match. So I'll put 1 here now that we have combined them in the tree. And we're using the head complement rule to make an adjective phrase. And the specifier of this adjective phrase is the specifier of the adjective, which is co-indexed with the gap, but it is not identified with the gap. So we have a new tag now to pass that up to the adjective phrase node. And our next word is be, which is a verb, and the specifier of its complement is its own specifier, and actually, magically, that is already tag 3, so we don't even have to change that. So now, once again, using the head complement rule to get a verb phrase with our specifier that is co-indexed with that gap we had on complete. And now we have another verb phrase. Next is another infinitival 2, which wants a complement that is inf minus form base, which we already have for B, and its own specifier is the specifier of its complement. So actually we need to change this tag to be 3 to match that. And once again, using the head complement rule to get a verb phrase, and this specifier passes up again. So our next word is homework, but I'm actually just going to bring this and homework together because that's just a simple noun phrase. We can just do that really quick. So this is a determiner, homework is a noun. I'm going to use the head specifier rule to get a noun phrase. Everything's getting really tiny, but that's why I'm going to post a LaTeX version of this that you can actually read. This is just for the process. So now we have this big verb phrase, to be easy to complete, and this noun phrase, this homework, but I'm not going to connect them actually because they're both going to be the complements of want. So now we're going to bring want down, and so this is a verb, and its first complement is identified with the specifier of its second complement. So I'm going to change this to that 3 tag we've been using, and now this noun phrase node is that 3. We finally found it, and use the head complement rule to pick up these 2 complements and create a verb phrase, which is looking for a specifier now, and I'll use a tag 4 for that because we have not used that number yet, and that tag will also go on the node for want. So now we have our last word, I, and this is the tag 4 specifier noun phrase, and we will use the head specifier rule to create a sentence, and that is the tree. And all the nodes at the bottom got completely illegible because they're so small. But that is how you build a tree for the sentence, I want this homework to be easy to complete. And check Canvas for the LaTeX version of this that is actually readable.